My name is Dorothy, and I'm 73 years old. For 50 years, I poured my heart into every meal I made for my family. But when my own son stood in front of a room full of strangers and called my cooking peasant slop that wouldn't be fit for a dog, I knew something had to change. What he didn't know was that I still held the deed to the restaurant he thought he owned. By the time I was finished, he learned that sometimes the quietest person in the room holds all the power. Asterisk if you've ever been dismissed or humiliated by someone you trusted. Stay with me. This story is about finding your voice when everyone thinks you've lost it. Asterisk, it all started back in 1975 when I married my husband, Harold. We were both from simple farming families in Iowa, and neither of us had much more than the clothes on our backs and a shared dream of building something together. Harold worked construction during the day. I took in sewing and mending to help make ends meet. Asterisk's food was always my language of love. Even when we could barely afford ground beef, I'd stretch it with potatoes and onions, season it with herbs I grew in coffee cans on our windowsill, and somehow make it taste like a feast. Harold would come home exhausted, covered in dust and paint, and I'd have something warm waiting for him. "Dot," he'd say, using his pet name for me, "I swear you could make shoe leather taste like prime rib." Asterisk, when our son Benjamin was born in 1978, I thought my heart might burst from joy. That little boy was everything to us. Our hope, our future, our reason for working 16-hour days. I'd cook his favorite meals, pack elaborate lunches for school, and spend hours teaching him to make my grandmother's apple pie recipe. He'd stand on a step stool beside me, flour in his hair, giggling as he tried to roll out the dough. "Asterisk, Mama," he'd say in that sweet voice, "when I grow up, I want to cook just like you." Those were the happiest years of my life. As Benjamin grew older, I noticed changes. Not the normal growing up changes, something deeper. He became embarrassed by our modest home, ashamed of Harold's work clothes, and increasingly critical of everything I did. When his friends came over, he'd steer them away from the kitchen where I was cooking, as if my presence somehow diminished him. Asterisk, the first real crack in our relationship came when he was 16. I'd made my famous pot roast for Sunday dinner, the same recipe that had won the county fair blue ribbon 3 years running. Benjamin took one bite, made a face, and pushed his plate away. Asterisk, "This is too salty," he announced. "And the meat is tough. Can't you learn to cook properly?" Asterisk Harold's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Benjamin Robert, you apologize to your mother this instant." Asterisk, "It's okay, Harold," I said quietly, though my heart was breaking. "Maybe it is a little salty tonight." Asterisk, but it wasn't salty. I'd been making that roast for 20 years, and I knew every spice, every timing, every secret that made it perfect. Benjamin was just ... changing. Asterisk. When Benjamin left for college on a full scholarship something, Harold and I sacrificed everything to help him achieve. I thought distance might heal whatever was growing between us. I sent care packages filled with his favorite cookies and handwritten recipe cards. I called every Sunday to check on him, to remind him to eat vegetables, to ask about his classes. Asterisk, he studied business administration, and with each semester, he came home more polished, more sophisticated, and more distant. His vocabulary filled with words like market positioning and consumer demographics. He started correcting my grammar, suggesting I take classes to improve myself. "Dorothy," he said one Christmas break, he'd stop calling me Mama. "You need to understand that the world is changing. People expect more now. They want experiences, not just ... this." He gestured dismissively at the dinner table I'd spent hours preparing. Asterisk, I didn't argue. I just kept cooking, kept loving, kept hoping that somewhere inside this young man was the little boy who used to help me make apple pie. Asterisk, after college, Benjamin moved to Chicago and got a job with a consulting firm. He'd call occasionally, usually when he needed something, but his visits home became rare. Harold and I felt his absence like a constant ache. Asterisk. Then, in 2005, everything changed. Harold's father passed away and left us a small inheritance. Not a fortune, but enough to make a difference. We were sitting at our kitchen table, trying to decide what to do with the money. When Benjamin called, I have an opportunity. He said, his voice more excited than I'd heard it in years. There's a restaurant space available in a great location. I want to open my own place, but I need investors. Harold and I looked at each other. Our son was asking for help, trusting us with his dreams. How much do you need? Harold asked, 50,000 for the initial investment, plus maybe another 34 renovations and equipment. It was most of the inheritance, but seeing Benjamin passionate about something again felt like a gift. We agreed immediately. If you're enjoying this story of family, betrayal, and eventual justice, please subscribe to hear more tales of resilience from seniors who've lived through it all. Benjamin insisted on making everything professional. He had contracts drawn up, legal documents prepared, the whole restaurant business properly incorporated. What he didn't explain clearly, and what I didn't understand at the time, was that while he was listed as the manager and operator, the property deed and primary ownership remained in Harold's and my names. It's just for tax purposes, he assured us. This way, you'll have legal protection, and I'll have the freedom to run the business. Harold and I trusted him completely. We signed papers, transferred money, and watched our son's dream take shape. The restaurant was beautiful. Benjamin had impeccable taste, and he transformed the space into something elegant and modern. He hired trained chefs, sommelier, waitstaff with experience at high-end establishments. He called it Harvest Moon, a name that made me think of the farm where I grew up. Simpler times. For the first few months, business was good. Benjamin would call with updates, sharing his excitement about positive reviews and growing customer base. Harold and I felt proud, useful. Like we'd helped create something meaningful. But we were never invited to eat there. 2 years after Harvest Moon opened, Benjamin called to invite us to a special event. He was hosting a food critics dinner. He explained, and he wanted us to see what he'd accomplished. I spent 3 days deciding what to wear. I wanted to look nice for Benjamin, to show his colleagues that he came from good people. Harold bought a new tie, the first one he'd purchased in 15 years. We arrived at the restaurant that evening feeling nervous but excited. The dining room was full of well-dressed people, food writers, local celebrities. Benjamin greeted us at the door, impeccably dressed in a chef's coat. Looking every inch the successful restaurateur. Dorothy. Harold, he said, shaking our hands like we were casual acquaintances. Welcome to Harvest Moon. The dinner was spectacular. Course after course of beautiful, artfully presented food. I recognized some of the flavors, herbs, and spices I'd introduced Benjamin 2 years ago. Techniques I'd seen him practice in our kitchen. But everything was elevated, refined, transformed into something I barely recognized. After the meal, Benjamin stood up to address the room. He talked about his vision for the restaurant, his commitment to excellence, his journey from humble beginnings to culinary success. Then he said something that changed everything. I want to thank everyone who made this possible, he began. But I especially want to acknowledge how far we've come from the simple, honestly quite awful food I grew up with. My mother's cooking was, well, let's just say it was peasant slop that wouldn't be fit for a dog. Everything I've accomplished here is about rising above that kind of mediocrity. The room laughed. People actually laughed. I felt Harold's hand find mine under the table. Felt him squeeze my fingers as if he could somehow absorb my pain. I sat there smiling politely while my son publicly humiliated me in front of strangers. We left quietly during the applause. Without saying goodbye, after that night, I didn't speak to Benjamin for almost 2 years. He called a few times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Harold tried to mediate to explain that maybe Benjamin was just nervous, that he didn't mean what he said. But I knew better. Those words came from somewhere deep, from a place where shame and resentment had been growing for years. Meanwhile, Harvest Moon continued to thrive. I'd see reviews in the local paper, mentions in magazines. Benjamin had become something of a local celebrity, the young entrepreneur who'd built a successful business from nothing. The story always focused on his individual achievement, his vision, his hard work. Our investment. Our sacrifice, our years of support. None of that was ever mentioned. In 2010, Harold had a heart attack. He was working on the roof of our neighbor's barn, helping with repairs, when he simply collapsed. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Benjamin came to the funeral, of course. It was respectful, appropriately somber, and he even delivered a brief eulogy about what a good man his father had been. But throughout the service, I could see him checking his phone, distracted by restaurant. Business after the burial, as people were leaving. Benjamin approached me, Dorothy. He said, "I'm sorry for your loss. Dad was a good man." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I know this is difficult timing." He continued, "But there are some legal matters we need to discuss. With Dad gone, the restaurant ownership situation is ... complicated. I think it would be best if we simplified things. Transferred everything directly to me. I can have my lawyer draw up the papers." I looked at my son, this man who'd just watched his father buried, who was already thinking about business arrangements, and something inside me finally broke. "I'll consider it," said quietly, but I had no intention of considering anything. After Harold's funeral. I spent weeks going through his papers trying to understand our financial situation. That's when I discovered the truth about Harvest Moon. The restaurant was struggling, had been struggling for over a year. Benjamin had taken out loans against the property, used the business credit for personal expenses, and was months behind on payments to suppliers. The gleaming success story was built on borrowed money and creative accounting. More importantly, I learned that as the surviving owner, I had complete legal control over the property and the business. Benjamin's management contract was dependent on the owner's my approval. I also discovered that Benjamin had been telling people he was the sole owner of Harvest Moon. He'd given interviews where he claimed to be a self-made entrepreneur who'd built his business without help from anyone. The story of his humble beginnings had become part of his brand. But he'd conveniently edited out the part where his parents provided the initial investment. If this story is resonating with you, please hit that subscribe button. Sometimes the most powerful stories come from the people who've been underestimated. I spent months planning what would happen next. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, about reclaiming something that had been taken from me. Through lies and manipulation. First, I hired my own lawyer, someone with no connection to Benjamin or his business. I wanted to understand exactly what my legal rights were, what I could and couldn't do. Second, I started visiting the restaurant, not as Benjamin's mother, but as a paying customer. I'd sit in the back corner, observe how the business operated, listen to conversations. I learned about the staff, the suppliers, the regular customers. What I discovered was heartbreaking. Benjamin had become a tyrant. He berated his staff, screamed at servers for minor mistakes, and treated everyone around him with the same contempt he'd shown me. The beautiful restaurant I'd helped create had become a place of fear and stress. I also learned that several longtime employees were planning to quit. The head chef, Maria, had been with the restaurant since it opened, but she was exhausted by Benjamin's behavior. Two of the best servers were looking for new jobs. The sous chef had already given notice. These were good people, talented people, who deserved better. On a Tuesday evening in March 2011, I walked into Harvest Moon during the dinner rush. Benjamin was in the kitchen, and I could hear him shouting at someone about a delayed order. I waited at the hostess stand until he emerged. Dorothy, he said, looking genuinely surprised. What are you doing here? I came to talk to you, I said calmly, about the restaurant. He glanced around nervously. This isn't really a good time. We're busy tonight. Maybe we could meet for coffee sometime this week. No, I said. We'll talk now. In your office. Something in my tone must have warned him. He led me to the small office behind the kitchen, closed the door, and sat behind his desk like he was conducting a business meeting. What's this about? He asked. I placed a folder on his desk. It's about the lies you've been telling. He opened the folder and found copies of financial records, loan documents, and legal papers. His face went white. I know about the debts, I said. I know about the loans you took out against property that doesn't belong to you. I know about the interviews where you claimed to be self-made. Dorothy, I can explain. I'm not finished. My voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now. I know about how you treat your employees. I know about the suppliers who haven't been paid. I know about the lies you built this business on. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, his polished composure finally cracking. What do you want? Want you to resign as manager of this restaurant effective immediately? He laughed, actually laughed. Can't be serious. This is my restaurant. I built this place from nothing. No, I said, standing up. You built it from the $50,000 Harold and I gave you. You built it on property that we own. You built it with love and support that you've spent years denying and mocking. You don't understand how business works, he said desperately. You can't just walk in here and I can do whatever I want, I interrupted. Because I own this place. And as of right now, you're fired. The next few months were the hardest of my life. Benjamin fought me legally, claiming that his management contract gave him operational control. He tried to rally support from staff and customers, caning me as a vindictive old woman who didn't understand the restaurant business. But the truth has a way of coming out. When the staff learned that I was the real owner, I'd been the one providing the initial investment and support, their loyalty shifted. When suppliers learned that I was prepared to honor the debts Benjamin had accumulated, they were willing to work with me. Most importantly, when I offered Maria the position of head chef and manager with a partnership stake in the restaurant, she accepted immediately. Mrs. Dorothy, she said, I've been waiting for someone to treat this place with the respect it deserves. Under Maria's management, Harvest Moon became something beautiful again. We simplified the menu, focusing on well-prepared, honest food made with quality ingredients. We treated the staff with respect, paid suppliers on time, and created an atmosphere where people genuinely wanted to work. I started coming in regularly. Not to interfere, but to help where I could. I taught Maria some of the techniques I'd learned over 50 years of cooking. I shared stories about the herbs and spices that had been in my family for generations. I helped train new servers, showing them how to make customers feel welcomed and valued. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you to subscribe one more time. These stories of resilience and justice need to be shared, and your support helps make that possible. It took 3 years for Benjamin to contact me. He called on a Sunday evening just as I was finishing dinner. Dorothy, he said. His voice smaller than I'd heard it since he was a child. I need to apologize. I listened as he told me about the years since he'd left the restaurant. He'd struggled to find work, struggled with depression, struggled with the consequences of his choices. He'd been forced to confront the person he'd become, the bridges he'd burned, the relationships he'd destroyed. Asterisk, I was so ashamed of where I came from, he said. I thought success meant leaving everything behind, proving I was better than my raising. But I realize now that I threw away the best parts of who I was. Asterisk, I didn't make it easy for him. We talked for hours that night and many nights after. He had to acknowledge the pain he'd caused, the lies he'd told, the way he'd betrayed the people who loved him most. Asterisk, but slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild our relationship. Asterisk, today, Benjamin works at Harvest Moon again. Not as the owner or AD manager, but as a line cook, learning the business from the ground up. He's working to pay back the money he owes, to rebuild the trust he destroyed, to earn his place in the family again. Asterisk, he's also learning to cook. Really cook. Not the elaborate presentations and fancy techniques he once thought made him superior, but the honest, nourishing food that feeds both body and soul. Asterisk, last Sunday, he came to my house for dinner. He brought ingredients and offered to help prepare the meal. As we stood side by side in my kitchen, chopping vegetables and seasoning the pot roast, I saw glimpses of the little boy who used to help me make apple pie. Asterisk. Mama, he said quietly, using that name for the first time in years, I'm sorry it took me so long to understand. I reached over and squeezed his hand, flour dusting both our fingers. You're here now, I said. That's what matters. Asterisk, people often ask me if I regret how I handled the situation with Benjamin and the restaurant. They wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have found a gentler way to resolve our conflict. Asterisk, but I've learned something important in my 73 years. Sometimes love requires strength. Sometimes protecting the people you care about means making difficult decisions. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. Asterisk, for years. I stayed silent while Benjamin built his success on lies, while he treated good people badly, while he denied the love and support that had made his dreams possible. My silence wasn't helping him. It was enabling him to become someone I barely recognized. Asterisk, when I finally found my voice. When I finally stood up for what was right, I didn't just save the restaurant. I saved my son from becoming a person he couldn't live with. Asterisk, today, Harvest Moon is thriving. It's a place where families gather, where the staff is treated with respect, where the food is prepared with love and served with pride. It's become the kind of restaurant I always dreamed it could be, a place that nourishes not just bodies, but communities. Asterisk, and Benjamin is slowly becoming the kind of man I always hoped he could be. Not the sophisticated, ruthless businessman he thought he wanted to be, but someone who understands that true success comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. Asterisk, the little boy who used to help me make apple pie is still there. Underneath all the hurt and pride and fear, it just took a mother's love and a mother's strength to help him find his way back. Asterisk, if you're facing a situation where someone you love has lost their way, remember that silence isn't always golden. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is speak up, stand up, and refuse to let someone you care about destroy themselves and others. Asterisk, your voice matters. Your strength matters. And sometimes the quietest person in the room really does hold all the power. Asterisk.